Today we're going to be talking about using intersectional approaches to enhance artificial intelligence and the user experience. My name's Imani Rupert Gordon. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, or they, them, and theirs, and I'm the Executive Director of Affinity Community Services. We work with Black LGBTQ women and other LGBTQ communities of color on the south side of Chicago. It's our thought that by doing our work intersectionally and by working with the most marginalized populations, that everyone can see good from that. And I know that's not rocket science to this group. Most of us are in this room because we want to be valued for our identities. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about that concept, or intersectionality. We're going to talk about how to incorporate intersectionality into a design process. And then we're going to talk about some intersectional fails and what we can maybe do next time. So first, let's talk about what intersectionality is. Here's a definition. This is how we start everything. If you're someone that takes pictures, go on ahead. This is the important part of the definition, but this is the part that I want you to remember. When we talk about intersectionality, what we're talking about is identities and how they relate to systems. And that's important because very often when people think about intersectionality, someone said earlier that it's become a buzz term, and it has. Intersectionality is almost 30 years old. It was coined in 1989, but it seems to have come in our collective consciousness in the last 5 years or so. And we know that it's bigger than that. And I'm gonna spend some time with intersectionality because I want you to remember this far after you forget me. But intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and Kimberly Crenshaw is a lawyer. And she coined this term to talk about a specific instance when she saw a case in employment discrimination. Emma DeGraffenreid is a black woman, and she was claiming employment discrimination with her employer. When she went to court and said, you know, I'm being discriminated against on the basis of my race and my gender, her employer said, this is ridiculous. You know, we hire black people and we hire women, so it would be ludicrous that you would even say something like that. And the thing is, he was right. They did hire black people and they did hire women, but the part they didn't talk about or acknowledge was that the black people they hired were men, because this company was General Motors, and the men that they hired, the black men that they hired, were to do mechanical work, and the women they hired were white women, and those people did secretarial work. And so all of this failed to acknowledge the particular type of sexism and the particular type of racism that someone might experience because they were both black and a woman. And so this term intersectionality was to talk about how these identities work together to produce a particular type of discrimination. And that's what we call an intersectional fail. Now, and those happen. They do happen, and they're going to happen in all the work that we do. But this was something that was really interesting to Kimberly Crenshaw, and she thought, you know, if we have employment protections, why their only job is to protect employment? Why would they fail if their absolute only job? And the thing was, it's because they were never meant to support someone like Emma DeGraffenreid. They were never meant to. And that's what happens when we are working with populations and not the most marginalized. When employment discrimination laws are meant to support people with one marginalized identity. So when we start working with more than one, it just does a horrible job of protecting people. And Kimberly Crenshaw says, if we aren't intersectional, some of us, the most vulnerable, are going to fall through the cracks. And so I want to talk about this with you all because you are the creators of systems. You know, you're the gatekeepers for knowledge and education, and you have the possibility, you have the opportunity to put this out for folks and to reach folks that aren't typically the communities that we reach out to, the ones that are most marginalized. And so let's talk about what that can look like. So if this is your design thinking process, I would say that you could incorporate intersectionality in absolutely all of the levels. Now, I understand that this is not how everyone does their work, and you might have a hard time getting some approval for this, and I get that. But what I want to say is that there is an opportunity to incorporate intersectionality in all of the work that we do at all of the levels we do. To go over this briefly, under the first stage, to understand, if our job is to define a problem or figure out what problem we're trying to solve, and you have to empathize in order to understand that. You know, we need more than analytics to figure out how people work, and we also need to ask more than the right questions. We also need the right people on the teams. You know, someone said earlier that it's not possible for someone, you know, as a queer, black, cis woman, it's not possible for a straight white cis man to have my experiences, no matter how much I articulate these things to him. And so we want to make sure that our teams are diverse. Under the second stage, to explore. If we're going to build a prototype, then we have to ideate first. And so to think about what that looks like, this is actually what I think is a really interesting part to think about intersectionally. When we're thinking about artificial intelligence, oftentimes this is the team that is actually building the algorithms. And so this team might have a better perspective about how something might work. You know, in the understanding team, if someone says, we need a lot of flexibility in this particular area, that might not translate to having a lot of flexibility in another area. And you wouldn't know that unless you're the person writing the algorithm. And we know that a lot of flexibility in other areas can very quickly turn into an intersectional fail. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. And then the last is to materialize. We know that before we implement things, that we have to test to do them to make sure that all of these things run together. But we also want to make sure that we're asking the right types of questions. What does it really mean when we're testing things? And I'll give an example of that as well. So we're going to talk about now what happens when we aren't intersectional. And I want to preface this by saying, you know, when we do the best that we can, we are still going to fail at intersectionality. Like, that's something that's going to happen. And what we have to do is figure out how to fail less and less, and to hold each other accountable, but not to throw people away. You know, organizations will make mistakes the same way that people make mistakes. And so when I give these examples, it's not because they're bad organizations or anything. I just picked them because they're actually pretty popular ones, and I thought you might recognize them. So the first one is last year in 2016, a Twitter bot named Tay was introduced by Microsoft, and they called it an experiment in conversational understanding. Now, I mean, the thing is, this happens, you know. So Tay is supposed to interact with other Twitter users, and when you interact with Tay, it's going to enhance your experience using Twitter. Like, we can understand why someone might want that. And then in 12 hours, Tay was tweeting, you know, some racist, sexist, transphobic things. Wasn't doing the best, and they had to eventually take it down. And so thinking about what we could have done differently in this situation, and the thing is, I also don't want to oversimplify this. These are very complex problems. Like, it's not because someone was just incompetent. These are just things that we have to work on and continuously learn from. You know, we might think in a, you know, I mean, I'm running out of time here, so I want to make sure that I get to this. You could have picked any level where you might think about how this works different. In 2015, Google had an image hosting service called Google Photos, and it did all the things that we would want an image hosting service to do. It stores a bunch of pictures, so you have access to them really quickly. They sort by geographic location. By the date that you took them, and they tag photos for you. Again, super helpful things to do. And the program ended up tagging several black people as gorillas on that, which is obviously not ideal. And so thinking about what we could do, lots of ways you can talk about intersectionality. So think about what we could do to make this better next time. And again, this isn't because this is an incompetent company. We know that that's not the case. We just know that these things are complicated. And what we're talking about is really an algorithm bias. It's when artificially intelligent tools take on the biases of people or the public data that they're interacting with. And so that's what we're trying to correct for. These aren't simple things, and it's not because people are incompetent. I think that's really important for us to say. It's just something we have to try to keep doing better. And so one of the things we might do is testing. We know that historically, marginalized communities aren't part of testing audiences, and making sure that we're testing more folks. And those are some things that we can do. I'm running out of time here, so I just want to finish by saying, Maya Angelou says, when you know better, do better. And I'm so excited to do better with all of you. It's my time. Thank you.